Nothing prepares a young woman for waking up married to a stranger. Clara Mae's 21st birthday was supposed to be a quiet celebration with her mother, but instead she finds herself in silk sheets with a gold ring weighing heavy on her finger. The man beside her is Caleb Thorne, the richest cattle baron in 3 states, and he swears she's his wife. But Clara remembers nothing, past blowing out her birthday candles back home in Cheyenne. Her cheek is bruised, and the room smells of gun oil and bourbon. Caleb's touch is gentle, but his eyes hold dark secrets. Every locked drawer in his grand house whispers of danger. The ring feels like a chain, and the fine clothes like a costume. What happened in those missing hours that changed her life forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light streaming through tall windows revealed more than Clara Mae had bargained for. She sat on the edge of the enormous 4-poster bed, her bare feet barely touching the polished hardwood floor, staring at the heavy gold band that circled her finger like a beautiful shackle. The ring was ornate, clearly expensive, with tiny diamonds that caught the Wyoming sunlight and threw it back in sparkles that hurt her eyes. Caleb Thorne had risen before dawn, she'd noticed, his side of the bed already cold when she'd awakened. The indent in his pillow and the faint scent of leather and pine soap were the only evidence he'd been there at all. Now she was alone in this grand room that felt more like a museum than a bedroom, surrounded by furnishings that spoke of wealth beyond anything she'd ever imagined. The mahogany dresser stood nearly 8 feet tall, its mirror reflecting a young woman Clara barely recognized. Her usual brown hair was arranged in an elaborate style she'd never worn, held in place with pearl-tipped pins that must have cost more than her mother's monthly household budget. The silk dress draped across the nearby chair was the color of fresh cream, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Even the undergarments laid out for her were fine cotton and silk, not the rough muslin she was accustomed to. Clara stood slowly, testing her balance. Her head throbbed with a dull ache that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She moved to the window and gazed out at the sprawling ranch that stretched toward the horizon. Cattle dotted the distant pastures like dark specks against the golden grass, and she could see ranch hands moving among them, their figures small and purposeful in the early light. This was the Thorne Ranch, she remembered Caleb telling her when she'd first awakened in confusion. The largest cattle operation between Denver and Cheyenne, he'd said with quiet pride. His family had built it from nothing over 3 generations, turning a modest homestead into an empire that employed half the men in Ember Ridge. But Clara's memories of her own life were clear as mountain spring water right up until yesterday evening. She remembered her mother, Clara Mae Whitfield, humming as she prepared a small birthday cake in their tiny kitchen. She remembered the way the candlelight had danced across her mother's face, weathered by years of hard work, but still beautiful. She remembered making a wish as she blew out the 21 candles, a foolish girl's wish for adventure and romance. Her mother had saved for weeks to afford the small gifts she'd given Clara that night: a new hair ribbon, blue as a summer sky, a bar of rose-scented soap wrapped in brown paper, a letter that had arrived from Clara's aunt in San Francisco, full of news and an invitation to visit. Simple things, but given with such love that Clara's heart had felt ready to burst. Then nothing. A blank space in her mind where the rest of her birthday should have been. Clara dressed carefully in the fine clothes, her fingers clumsy with the tiny buttons and unfamiliar fastenings. When she finally worked up the courage to leave the bedroom, she found herself in a hallway lined with oil paintings of stern-faced men and elegant women. The Thorne family, she assumed, watching her with painted eyes that seemed to hold judgment. The house was enormous, with rooms that served purposes Clara could only guess at. A library with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound books. A parlor with furniture so delicate she was afraid to sit down. A dining room with a table that could seat 20 people, its surface polished to a mirror shine. She followed the sound of voices and the scent of coffee and bacon toward what she hoped was the kitchen. Her stomach reminded her that she couldn't remember eating since yesterday's cake, and even that memory felt distant and dreamlike. The kitchen was warm and bustling, a sharp contrast to the formal elegance of the rest of the house. A plump woman with greying hair tied back in a practical bun looked up from the stove as Clara entered, her face creasing into a kind smile. "There you are. Dear," the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Mrs. Henderson, but you can call me Ruth like everyone else does. How are you feeling this morning?" "I'm confused," Clara admitted, grateful for the woman's straightforward manner. "I don't remember," Mr. Caleb explained. "You'd had quite a shock," Ruth interrupted gently. "He said to feed you well and not to worry you with too many questions. Sit yourself down and I'll fix you a proper breakfast." Clara took a seat at the well-worn wooden table that dominated the center of the kitchen. It was scarred from years of use, marked with the burns and cuts of countless meals prepared. Somehow, those imperfections made her feel more at ease than all the perfection in the rest of the house. "Mrs. Henderson Ruth, how long have you worked here?" Clara asked, as the older woman moved efficiently between the stove and counter. 23 years come next month," Ruth replied, cracking eggs into a cast-iron skillet. "Started when Mr. Caleb's father was still alive, and I've watched that boy grow from a wild young man into the finest rancher this side of the Continental Divide." "And you know about us?" "About our marriage." Ruth's hands stilled for just a moment before she resumed cooking. "I know Mr. Caleb is happier than I've seen him in years," she said carefully. "And I know he's been worried sick about you since you've been poorly." Before Clara could ask what she meant by poorly, the kitchen door swung open and Caleb entered, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothes were practical, worn denim and a cotton shirt rolled up at the sleeves, but even dressed for ranch work, there was something about him that spoke of authority and wealth. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "I hope you slept well." "I slept," Clara replied honestly, "but I still don't remember." "The doctor said that might take time," Caleb interrupted, settling into the chair across from her. "Head injuries can be unpredictable that way." Ruth set a plate before Clara laden with eggs, bacon and biscuits that were still steaming from the oven. The food was perfectly prepared, but Clara found she could barely taste it. Her attention was fixed on Caleb's face, searching for some clue to the mystery of how she'd come to be here. "What kind of head injury?" she asked. "You fell," Caleb said simply. "Hit your head on the kitchen table, scared me half to death." Clara touched the tender spot on her cheek, feeling the slight swelling there. "I don't remember falling. The doctor says that's normal with this type of injury. Your memory should come back gradually." There was something in his tone that suggested he hoped it wouldn't. But before Clara could pursue that thought, Ruth bustled over with coffee for both of them. "Mr. Caleb, Miguel is waiting for you in the barn," Ruth said. "Says there's some trouble with the fence line near Willow Creek." Caleb nodded, but his eyes remained on Clara. "Will you be all right if I go take care of that? It shouldn't take more than a few hours." Clara wanted to say no, wanted to demand answers to the 100 questions crowding her mind. But she also sensed that pushing too hard might close whatever door of communication they had established. "I'll be fine," she said instead. "Maybe I'll explore the house a bit, see if anything looks familiar." Something flickered across Caleb's face. Was it worry? Fear? Before she could be sure, he stood and moved to the kitchen door. "Just be careful," he said. "Some of the rooms upstairs haven't been used in years. The floorboards might not be safe." After he left, Clara sat in the warm kitchen with Ruth, who seemed content to work quietly while Clara finished her breakfast. But Clara's mind was racing. Head injury or not, something felt wrong about the whole situation. The way Caleb avoided her direct questions, the careful way Ruth spoke about her illness, the fact that she was wearing clothes that fit perfectly despite never having been measured for them. "Ruth," Clara said finally, "do you happen to know where my own clothes are, the ones I was wearing when I—" When the accident happened? Ruth's hands paused in their work of kneading bread dough. I believe Mr. Caleb had them cleaned and stored away. They were quite well. They were damaged in the fall. Could I see them? Oh dear, I'm not sure where he put them. You'd have to ask him when he returns. Clara nodded, but filed away the evasion for later consideration. She helped Ruth clear the breakfast dishes, grateful for something useful to do with her hands, while her mind worked through the puzzle of her situation. When the kitchen was tidy, Clara excused herself to explore the house. She wandered through the formal rooms again, looking for anything that might trigger a memory. In the library, she ran her fingers along the leather spines of books, many of them bearing the Thorne family name stamped in gold. Volumes on cattle breeding, land management, and law filled the shelves alongside classic literature and poetry. It was in Caleb's study that she made her first real discovery. The room was clearly his private domain, with a massive oak desk dominating the center and chairs positioned for conducting business. The walls were lined with maps of the territory and framed photographs of prize cattle and horses. Clara was examining a photograph of Caleb with a group of other ranchers when she noticed something else, a desk drawer that wasn't quite closed. Through the narrow gap, she could see the corner of what looked like a photograph. Her heart pounding with guilt and curiosity in equal measure, she carefully opened the drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of business papers, was a faded daguerreotype in an ornate silver frame. The photograph showed a young woman with delicate features and light-colored hair arranged in an elaborate style. But what made Clara's breath catch in her throat was the woman's face. It could have been Clara's own reflection, so strong was the resemblance. The woman in the photograph was wearing a dress similar in style to the one Clara had found in the bedroom, and around her neck was a delicate silver locket. Her expression was serious, as was common in photographs of that era, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of sadness or fear. Clara studied the photograph for a long time, her hands trembling slightly as she held it. Who was this woman who looked so much like her? And why did Caleb have her photograph hidden in his private desk? The sound of boots on the front porch made Clara quickly replace the photograph and close the drawer. She was standing by the window, pretending to admire the view, when Caleb appeared in the doorway of the study. "Find anything interesting?" he asked, and Clara wondered if she imagined the tension in his voice. "Just looking around," she replied, turning to face him. "It's a beautiful home. You must be very proud of it." "It's been in my family for 3 generations," Caleb said, moving to stand behind his desk. "My great-grandfather built the original house, though it was much smaller then. Each generation has added to it." "The woman in the photograph in your desk?" Clara said suddenly, watching his reaction carefully. "Who is she?" Caleb's face went still, and for a moment Clara thought he might deny having any photograph. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he opened the drawer to retrieve the daguerreotype. "Her name was Sarah," he said quietly, staring down at the image. "Sarah Thorne. She was my wife." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Was?" "She died 3 years ago," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked very much like you." "That's why you—" Clara began, then stopped, not sure how to finish the thought. Caleb set the photograph on his desk and looked at Clara directly for the first time since entering the room. "That's why I what, Clara? Why I married you, why I brought you here?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I don't know anything anymore." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the study floor. Finally, Caleb spoke again. "You should know that whatever happened before, whatever brought you here, you're safe now. I give you my word on that." It should have been comforting, but something in his tone made it sound more like a warning than a promise. Clara nodded anyway, because she had nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to, at least nowhere she could remember. But as she left the study and climbed the stairs to her room, Clara Mae Whitfield, or Clara Thorne, if that's what she was, now made herself a promise. She would find out the truth about what had happened to her, about the mysterious Sarah, and about why a man she'd never met had married her, even if that truth turned out to be more dangerous than the mystery itself. Clara spent the next morning pacing her room like a caged animal, the silk dress rustling with each agitated step. The resemblance between herself and the woman in the photograph haunted her thoughts. Every time she caught her reflection in the mirror, she saw Sarah Thorne's face staring back, and it made her skin crawl. She had to get away from this place, had to return to Cheyenne and her mother. Whatever spell or confusion had brought her here would surely clear once she was back in familiar surroundings. Her mother would help her make sense of this nightmare. When Caleb knocked on her door that morning, Clara had made her decision. "I want to go home," she announced the moment he entered. "I need to see my mother." Caleb's face went pale, and he closed the door carefully behind him. "Clara, I need to tell you something. Please, sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want to go home to Cheyenne. I want to see my mother and figure out what happened to me." "You can't." His voice was so quiet she almost didn't hear him. "What do you mean, I can't? You're not my jailer, are you?" Caleb moved to the window, his broad shoulders blocking some of the morning light. When he spoke, his words fell like stones into still water. "Your mother died 3 days ago, Clara. Clara Mae Whitfield died in her sleep. You attended the funeral." The room tilted around Clara, and she grabbed the bedpost to keep from falling. No. That's not. I was with her on my birthday. She made me a cake. She was fine. That was 4 days ago." Caleb turned to face her, his grey eyes filled with something that might have been compassion. "You received word about her passing the morning after your birthday. You didn't take the news well." Clara sank onto the bed, her legs no longer able to support her. The world felt like it was crumbling around her, pieces of reality breaking away and falling into darkness. "I don't remember," she whispered. "I would remember my mother dying. I would remember her funeral. The doctor said the shock, combined with your head injury, might have caused your mind to block out the trauma." Clara pressed her hands to her temples, willing herself to remember. Surely something that devastating would leave some mark on her memory, some scar she could touch. But there was nothing, just that same blank space where the last few days should have been. How did she die? In her sleep, peaceful, from what the telegram said. Her heart just stopped. Tears came then, great heaving sobs that tore through Clara's chest. Caleb moved toward her as if to offer comfort, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Don't. Please just don't." He stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, while Clara wept for the mother she couldn't remember losing. When the worst of the storm had passed, she wiped her face with the back of her hand and tried to think clearly. "If I attended the funeral, there would be evidence, a train ticket perhaps, or—" "You were in no condition to travel alone," Caleb said carefully. "I accompanied you to Cheyenne. We were married there by the justice of the peace. You didn't want to be alone with your grief." Clara stared at him. "I married you because my mother died, a man I'd never met. We had met, briefly. Your mother and I had corresponded about some land she owned near my southern boundary. Good grazing land. When I came to Cheyenne to discuss purchasing it, I met you, and you fell in love with me in the space of a single meeting?" Something flickered across Caleb's face. "I was drawn to you, and you seemed to find comfort in my presence after your mother's death. The marriage was as much about providing you with security as anything else." Clara stood and moved to her trunk, pulling out the few personal items she'd found there. Her hands shook as she searched through them, looking for some proof of this story that sounded like a fever dream. "Where are my things from Cheyenne?" "My mother's things?" Most of her belongings were sold to pay her debts. "You kept a few items. They're in the wardrobe there." Clara rushed to the large wardrobe and began pulling out dresses and personal items. At the bottom of one drawer, her fingers closed around something small and hard. She pulled it out and found herself holding a train ticket, but it was torn nearly in half and had been carefully mended with tiny stitches. The ticket was from Cheyenne to Ember Ridge, dated 3 days ago. But that was impossible, according to Caleb. She'd been here for several days already. And why would the ticket be torn and then so carefully repaired? Caleb, Clara said slowly, holding up the ticket. This is dated wrong. He crossed the room quickly and took the ticket from her hands, studying it with a frown. It must be damaged. Old tickets sometimes. It was sewn back together, Clara interrupted. Look at the stitches. Someone tore this ticket in half and then sewed it back together again. Why would someone do that? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, turning the ticket over in his hands. I don't know, he said finally. Perhaps you tore it in your grief and then regretted it. You were quite distraught. But Clara was studying his face, and she could see the lie there as clearly as if he'd spoken it aloud. Whatever the truth about this ticket, Caleb knew it, and he wasn't telling her. I want to see the telegram about my mother's death, she said. Clara, I want to see it. If you have nothing to hide, show me the telegram. Caleb's jaw tightened. I don't think dwelling on these painful details will help your recovery. My recovery from what, exactly? A bump on the head, or something much worse? What are you suggesting? Clara took a step back from him, suddenly aware of how large he was, how alone they were in this room. I'm suggesting that nothing you've told me makes sense. I'm suggesting that a woman doesn't marry a stranger because her mother died. I'm suggesting that this ticket tells a different story than the one you're telling me. And what story do you think it tells? I think it tells the story of a woman who was trying to escape something, a woman who tore up her ticket but then changed her mind, a woman who was running towards something or away from something and ended up here. Caleb moved closer, and Clara saw something dangerous flicker in his grey eyes. And what do you think she was running from, Clara? Before she could answer, there was a sharp knock on the door. Caleb's expression shifted immediately, becoming alert and wary. Mr. Thorne? Ruth's voice came through the door, unusually urgent. There are men here to see you. They say it's about the young lady. Clara felt ice form in her veins. Men asking about her, who could that be? Tell them I'll be down in a moment, Caleb called back. They're not the sort to wait, sir, Ruth replied. And they're asking specifically about Miss Clara. Caleb cursed under his breath, then moved to Clara and gripped her shoulders firmly. Listen to me very carefully, he said, his voice low and intense. Whatever happens, whatever you hear, you stay in this room. Do you understand me? You do not come downstairs, and you do not let them see you. Who are they? Men who want to hurt you. Men you were running from. Then it's true I was running? Yes, Caleb said simply. You were running, and you came to me for help. Everything else I told you is true too, about your mother, about our marriage. But there are parts of the story I haven't shared, because I was hoping to keep you safe from them. Clara stared into his face, seeing honesty there for the first time since she'd awakened in his bed. What aren't you telling me? Your mother didn't die peacefully in her sleep, Clara. She was murdered, and the men who killed her are downstairs right now, looking for you. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, and Caleb steadied her with gentle hands. Why? She whispered. Why would anyone want to kill my mother? Because of the land. The property she owned wasn't just good grazing land. There's silver on it, quite a lot of silver, from what the surveyors found. Men have killed for much less. From downstairs came the sound of raised voices and heavy footsteps. Clara could hear Ruth protesting something, and then a man's voice, rough and demanding. Stay here, Caleb repeated. Lock the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone but me. He moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. Clara, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I swear to you, on my father's grave, that I will protect you, whatever it costs me. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with the truth crashing down around her like thunder. Her mother was dead, murdered, and she was being hunted by the same men who had killed her. And somewhere in her lost memories was the key to everything. If only she could remember before those men decided to stop asking questions and start taking action. Clara pressed her ear to the bedroom door, her heart hammering against her ribs as she listened to the muffled voices from below. She could hear Caleb's deep baritone, carefully controlled, and two other voices rougher, more aggressive. The words were unclear, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she heard the front door slam and the sound of horses riding away. Clara waited, counting her heartbeats, until Caleb's familiar footsteps climbed the stairs. "Clara, it's me." She unlocked the door with shaking fingers. Caleb stood in the hallway, his face grim but relieved. "They're gone," he said. "For now." What did they want? They claimed to be looking for a woman who stole money from them in Cheyenne. They had a description that could fit half the women in the territory. I told them I hadn't seen anyone matching that description. Clara sank into the chair by the window, her legs suddenly weak. "They'll be back, won't they?" "Probably. Men like that don't give up easily. Then I need to remember. I need to know what happened so I can—" Clara stopped, frustration building in her chest like steam in a kettle. "There has to be something. Some way to trigger my memory." The doctor said forcing it could make things worse. "The doctor doesn't have murderers hunting him," Clara snapped. Then, seeing Caleb's expression, she softened her tone. "I'm sorry. I know you're trying to help, but I can't just sit here waiting for my memory to return while those men—" "You're right," Caleb said quietly. "Maybe it's time we tried a different approach." That afternoon, while Caleb attended to ranch business, Clara began a systematic search of her room. If she had been here for several days, as Caleb claimed, surely there would be some evidence of her presence, something that might spark a memory. She started with the wardrobe, examining every dress and undergarment. The clothes were all fine quality and in her size, but none of them felt familiar. They were too fancy for a woman who had grown up in a modest home in Cheyenne, too sophisticated for someone who had never owned anything finer than Sunday calico. In the bottom drawer of the dresser, beneath carefully folded chemises, her fingers found something unexpected, a small, leather-bound book. Clara pulled it out with trembling hands, recognizing it immediately as a diary or journal. Her breath caught when she opened it and saw her own handwriting on the first page, dated just 5 days ago. Asterisk, I don't know who to trust anymore. The men came to the house again today, asking about the land. Mama tried to act like she didn't know what they were talking about, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She told me to pack a bag, just in case. Said she had a plan to keep me safe. Asterisk. Clara's heart raced as she read her own words, words she had no memory of writing. She flipped to the next entry. Asterisk, Mama is dead. They killed her. I saw them leave the house, and when I went in, she was on the kitchen floor. There was so much blood. I ran. I didn't even stop to bury her properly. God forgive me, but I ran. Asterisk. The journal trembled in Clara's hands. She was reading about her mother's murder in her own handwriting, and it was like watching it happen to someone else. The words were foreign to her, despite being written in her own careful script. Asterisk. Made it to the train station. The ticket master said there's a cattle rancher in Ember Ridge who's been asking about land near Cheyenne. Mama mentioned him once, said he seemed like a good man. Maybe he can help. Maybe he knows what to do about the silver and the men who want it. Asterisk. Silver. Caleb had mentioned silver on her mother's land. Clara continued reading, her hands growing steadier as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Asterisk. Can't stop shaking. Keep seeing Mama's face. The men on the train are watching me, I'm sure of it. One of them has been asking the conductor questions. I tore up my ticket if they check the records. Maybe they'll think I got off at an earlier stop, but I can't throw it away completely. It's proof of where I'm going. In case something happens to me. Asterisk. That explained the torn and mended ticket. Clara had torn it to throw off pursuit, then carefully sewn it back together as evidence of her destination. She turned to the next entry, dated just 3 days ago. Asterisk, arrived in Ember Ridge. The rancher Caleb Thorne is not what I expected. He's younger and kinder than I imagined. When I told him about Mama and the silver and the men who killed her, he didn't hesitate. He said he'd help me. He said he'd keep me safe. Asterisk. Asterisk. But I'm still scared. What if they find me here? What if they hurt him too? He seems strong, but these men, they're not ordinary thieves. They're organized, dangerous. Asterisk. The final entry was brief and written in a shaky hand. Asterisk. They found me, followed me here somehow. Caleb says there's only one way to protect me legally, marriage. If I'm his wife, I have the protection of his name and his resources. It sounds crazy, but what choice do I have? He's a good man. I can see it in his eyes. And maybe this is what Mama's plan was all along. She mentioned him specifically. Maybe she knew I'd need someone like him. Asterisk. Clara closed the journal and sat in stunned silence. Her own words had just solved the mystery of her marriage to Caleb. It hadn't been a romantic whirlwind or grief-induced madness. It had been a calculated decision to save her life. But if she had written all of this just days ago, why couldn't she remember any of it? A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Clara? It's Ruth. May I come in? Clara quickly hid the journal under her pillow and opened the door. Ruth entered with a tea tray, her maternal face creased with concern. Mr. Caleb told me about the men who came by, Ruth said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. Are you all right, dear? Ruth, can I ask you something? Clara said, accepting the cup of chamomile tea gratefully. When I first arrived here, was I injured? Ruth's hand stilled. What do you mean, dear? Caleb says I fell and hit my head, but I found some things that suggest I was already here when that happened. Mr. Caleb told you what happened, Ruth said carefully. It's not my place to contradict him, but you were here. You saw me arrive, didn't you? Ruth sank into the chair across from Clara, her shoulders sagging. You arrived 3 days ago, in the middle of the night. You were terrified, kept looking over your shoulder like you expected someone to follow you through the door. Mr. Caleb brought you straight up here and told me to prepare the room. And the head injury happened the next morning. You were pacing the kitchen, agitated and talking about leaving. You said the men would find you here and bring trouble to all of us. You were gesturing wildly, got too close to the table, and when you spun around, you struck your head on the corner. Hard. Clara touched the tender spot on her cheek. And that's when I lost my memory? You were unconscious for nearly a full day. When you woke up, Ruth spread her hands helplessly. You didn't remember arriving, didn't remember your mother's death, didn't remember agreeing to marry Mr. Caleb. The doctor said it was possible the trauma of witnessing your mother's murder, combined with the head injury, caused your mind to protect itself by forgetting. So everything Caleb told me was true, just not in the order he told it. He was trying to spare you the worst of it until you were stronger. Clara nodded slowly, pieces of the puzzle clicking together. But one question remained. Ruth, why did those men leave today? What did Caleb say to make them go away? Ruth was quiet for a long moment, refilling Clara's teacup with hands that weren't quite steady. He told them you were dead, she said finally. He told them Clara Mae Whitfield died 3 days ago and was buried in the town cemetery. As far as they know, they're hunting a ghost. The lie about her death should have brought Clara comfort, but instead it left her feeling hollow and strange. She was Clara Mae Whitfield, who was dead, and Clara Thorne, who was alive, but she felt caught between both identities, belonging fully to neither. That evening at dinner, Clara studied Caleb across the polished dining room table. He ate methodically, as if the food required his complete attention, but she could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his eyes occasionally flicked toward the windows. "How long can you keep up the pretense that I'm dead?" Clara asked finally. Caleb set down his fork carefully. "But what if they ask to see the grave? What if they want proof?" "There is a grave," Caleb said quietly, "with Clara Mae Whitfield's name on the headstone. I had it made this afternoon." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "You made me a gravestone?" Sometimes the most believable lies are built on small truths. Clara Mae Whitfield is dead. She died the moment you became Clara Thorne. "And what if I don't want to be Clara Thorne?" Caleb's grey eyes met hers across the table. "Then you're free to leave whenever your memory returns and you feel safe doing so." After dinner, Clara retreated to Caleb's study while he met with his foreman about security. She needed to understand more about the man who had risked everything to help her, and his private space felt like the best place to start. The room smelled of leather and tobacco, with an underlying scent of gun oil that reminded her of her father, dead these 10 years. The desk was orderly but not obsessively neat, with papers sorted into careful stacks and a pen set laid out precisely. Clara was examining the spines of law books on the shelf when something glinted behind them. Reaching back, her fingers closed around a small object that had been pushed out of sight. When she brought it into the light, she found herself holding a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. The locket was old but beautifully crafted, with intricate scrollwork etched around the edges. Clara opened it carefully and found a tiny compartment containing a lock of auburn hair, darker than her own brown curls but with the same natural wave. Beneath the hair was a folded piece of paper so small she could barely make out the writing. Asterisk. "Protect what matters most times" was written in careful script, followed by letters that looked like initials. Asterisk S. W. Asterisk. Clara stared at the locket, her mind racing. S. W. could stand for Sarah Whitfield, but that would make no sense. Sarah was the name of Caleb's dead wife, wasn't it? Unless... "You shouldn't be in here." Clara spun around, the locket clutched in her palm. Caleb stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I was just looking through my private things." His voice was calm, but Clara could hear the edge beneath it. "I found this." She held out the locket. "Behind your law books, it has the initials S.W." Caleb entered the study and closed the door behind him. For a moment, Clara wondered if she should be afraid, but then she saw the exhaustion in his face and realized he was as lost as she was. "Where did you find it exactly?" "Pushed back behind the books on criminal law." Caleb took the locket from her palm, his fingers brushing hers briefly. The contact sent an unexpected warmth up her arm. "This belonged to Sarah," he said finally. "Sarah Whitfield." "Whitfield? But that's your mother's name." Caleb sank into the chair behind his desk, suddenly looking older than his 30 years. "Clara, there are things about your family that you don't know. Things your mother never told you?" Clara remained standing, her hands gripping the back of the chair across from his desk. "What things?" "Sarah Whitfield, your mother had a sister. An older sister named Sarah who left Cheyenne 20 years ago." The pieces clicked together in Clara's mind with sickening clarity. "The woman in the photograph, your wife, she was your aunt, your mother's sister." Clara sank into the chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "My Aunt Sarah was your wife, and you never told me? I was trying to protect you from more pain. You'd just lost your mother, and I didn't want you to know that you'd also lost the aunt you'd never had a chance to meet. How did she die?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, turning the locket over in his hands. "She was murdered 3 years ago by the same men who killed your mother." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. "The same why? What did my family ever do to these people?" "It's not what you did, it's what you own." Caleb opened a drawer and pulled out a map, spreading it across the desk. This is the land your mother inherited from her father. And this, he pointed to a section marked in red, is where the silver was found. Clara studied the map, noting the surveyor's marks and mineral rights annotations. It's not just a little silver, is it? No, it's one of the richest veins found in this part of the territory, worth more money than most people see in a lifetime. And my Aunt Sarah knew about it? She suspected. That's why she left Cheyenne. She was being threatened by men who wanted the land. She came here, and we fell in love. I promised to help her fight for what was rightfully hers. But they killed her before you could. They made it look like an accident, a riding mishap. But I knew what they'd done. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. I couldn't prove it, couldn't get justice for her. But when you arrived 3 days ago, telling me the same story, I swore I wouldn't lose another woman to their greed. Clara reached across the desk and touched his hand gently. Is that why you married me? Because I reminded you of her? Caleb looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his carefully maintained control cracked. At first, yes, when you walked into my house that night, for a moment I thought it was her. You look so much like her it took my breath away. And now I know you're not Sarah. You're stronger than she was, braver. Sarah ran from the fight, but you came here looking for allies. You were ready to face these men. Clara felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. I wish I could remember being that brave. You still are. The courage doesn't disappear just because the memories have. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared secrets settling between them. Finally, Clara spoke again. Caleb, in my journal my last entry mentioned that my mother might have planned for me to come to you. Did you know her well enough for her to trust you with her daughter's life? I met your mother once, about 6 months ago. I came to Cheyenne to ask about purchasing her land, but when I mentioned I'd been married to Sarah Whitfield, she refused to sell. Said the land had already cost her family too much. But she remembered you? She said Sarah had written to her about me, about our marriage, about her happiness here. Caleb's voice grew soft. Your mother made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I'd look after you. She said Sarah had told her I was a man who kept his word. So when I showed up at your door, I was honoring a promise made to 2 women I cared about. Clara nodded slowly, understanding now why her mother's death had felt familiar even when she couldn't remember it. Somewhere in her lost memories was the knowledge that her mother had prepared her for this possibility, had given her a place to run when the danger became too great. There's something else, Caleb said quietly. Something I need you to know before those men come back. What? The marriage certificate we signed, it's real, Clara. Whatever happens, whatever you remember or decide, you are legally my wife. That gives you certain protections under the law. And certain obligations? Caleb's eyes met hers steadily. Only the ones you choose to accept. Clara woke before dawn to the sound of rain drumming against the windows. The storm had blown in sometime during the night, and the grey light filtering through the curtains gave the room a somber, secretive quality. She lay still for a moment, listening to the house settle around her and wondering if this was what peace felt like, or just the calm before another storm. She dressed quickly in one of the simpler dresses from the wardrobe, a deep blue calico that felt more familiar than the silks and satins. As she fastened the buttons, her fingers encountered something unusual in the fabric near the hem, a small, hard object sewn into the lining. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and carefully worked at the stitches with her fingernails until they gave way. What fell into her palm made her breath catch a small key, tarnished with age, but obviously important enough that someone had hidden it in her clothing. But whose key was it? And what did it open? She was examining the key more closely when a sharp crack echoed through the house, the unmistakable sound of a rifle being fired. Clara rushed to the window and peered through the rain-soaked glass. In the grey dawn light, she could see Caleb near the barn, a Winchester rifle in his hands, speaking intently with Miguel and two other ranch hands. Without thinking, Clara found herself moving toward the wardrobe where she'd noticed another rifle the day before. When she lifted it from its place behind the dresses, the weight of it felt familiar in her hands, not foreign or frightening, as it should have to a young woman who'd never handled weapons. She checked the rifle with movements that seemed to come from some buried knowledge, noting that it was loaded and well-maintained. The stock was carved with initials C.M. Clara Mae. This was her rifle, though she had no memory of ever owning one. "Interesting," said a voice from the doorway. Clara spun around, the rifle still in her hands, to find Caleb watching her with an unreadable expression. "You handle that like someone who knows how to use it," he observed. I don't know why, it just feels natural." Caleb stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "That's because your mother taught you to shoot when you were 12 years old. You wrote about it in your journal." Clara set the rifle carefully against the wall, her mind reeling. "Did you read my journal?" "Only after you lost your memory. I was looking for anything that might help me understand what you'd been through." Caleb's expression was apologetic but firm. "I needed to know how to protect you." "And what did you learn?" "That you're not the helpless victim I thought you were. According to your own words, you've been expecting trouble for months. You've been practicing with that rifle, learning to track and hunt. You even scouted escape routes from your mother's house." Clara stared at the rifle, trying to reconcile this image of herself as a prepared, capable woman with the confused, frightened girl she'd been since awakening here. "Why don't I remember any of that?" "Because remembering might mean remembering other things too, things your mind isn't ready to face yet." Before Clara could respond, Miguel appeared in the doorway, his hat dripping rainwater onto the floor. "Patron," he said urgently. "We found tracks near the south pasture, 3 riders, maybe 4. They've been watching the house." Caleb's face went hard. "How long?" "Hard to say with the rain, but the tracks are fresh. They might have been out there all night." Clara felt ice form in her veins. "They're back." "Or they never left," Caleb said grimly. "Miguel, double the watch and make sure the men know to shoot first and ask questions later if anyone approaches the house." "Si, patron." Miguel glanced at Clara, then back to Caleb. "And the Signora?" "Stays in the house." "Clara, I need you to promise me you won't try to leave this room unless I'm with you." Clara bristled at being told to hide while danger circled them like wolves. "I'm not helpless, Caleb. You just said so yourself. I know how to use that rifle. Knowing how to shoot and being ready to kill someone are different things entirely. How do you know I'm not ready?" Caleb studied her face for a long moment. "Because if you were, you'd remember doing it already." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a fired gun. Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "Your journal, Clara. The last entry you wrote before losing your memory. You wrote about the night your mother died, not just finding her body, but about what happened before that." Clara sank into the chair by the window, her legs suddenly weak. "Tell me, you were there when they came for her. You hid in the root cellar while they questioned her about the land, about the silver. When she refused to tell them anything, they hurt her. Badly. And I just hid? I let them hurt her? You waited until one of them was alone, and then you shot him. Clean through the heart, according to what you wrote. That's why they're really hunting you, Clara. Not just because of the land, but because you killed one of their own." Clara pressed her hands to her temples, willing herself to remember. Surely something as monumental as taking a human life would leave some mark on her soul, some scar she could touch. But there was nothing, just that same blank space where her memories should have been. "They don't know it was me, do they? Otherwise, they'd have accused me directly instead of asking about some woman who stole money. They know someone killed Frank Morrison, that was his name. but they think it might have been your mother defending herself, or maybe some drifter who happened upon the scene. But if I'm supposed to be dead, dead women don't shoot people, which is why this charade has to hold. If they suspect Clara Mae Whitfield is alive, they'll put together what really happened that night. Rain continued to drum against the windows as Clara processed this information. She was a killer. She'd taken a life in defense of her mother, and she couldn't even remember it. What kind of person did that make her? Caleb, she said quietly. The key I found sewn into my dress, do you know what it opens? He frowned. What key? Clara retrieved the small tarnished key from where she'd set it on the dresser. Caleb examined it carefully, turning it over in his palm. I've never seen this before. Where exactly did you find it? Hidden in the hem of the blue dress. Someone sewed it in there deliberately. Your mother, maybe? Or you yourself? Before you lost your memory? Clara took the key back, studying its worn surface. There has to be something it opens, something important enough to hide. A safe deposit box, maybe. Or a strong box. Did my mother have a safe deposit box? Not that I know of. But then again, I didn't know she'd been corresponding with your Aunt Sarah for years either. Your family seems to have been good at keeping secrets. From outside came the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. Caleb moved to the window, his hand automatically going to the gun at his hip. It's Sheriff Bradley, he said, relief evident in his voice, but he's riding hard, and he's alone. Clara joined him at the window, watching as the sheriff dismounted near the front porch. Even through the rain, she could see the tension in his posture. That's not a social call, Clara observed. No, it's not. Caleb moved toward the door. Stay here. Keep that rifle close. Caleb. He paused, looking back at her. What? Be careful. If something happens to you, I'll be truly alone. Something shifted in his expression, becoming warmer despite the grim circumstances. I'll be careful. And Clara, you're not alone. Whatever happens, remember that. Clara pressed her ear to the bedroom door, straining to hear the conversation between Caleb and Sheriff Bradley. Their voices drifted up from the parlor below, urgent, hushed tones that made her skin prickle with unease. She could only catch fragments. Found Morrison's body. Railroad men asking questions. Need to know what really happened. When footsteps began climbing the stairs, Clara quickly moved away from the door and positioned herself by the window, trying to appear casual. Caleb entered, his face grim, followed by a lean man with a weathered face and a silver star pinned to his vest. Clara, this is Sheriff Bradley. He needs to ask you some questions. The sheriff removed his hat, revealing graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Missus Thorne, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's been some trouble in Cheyenne, and I'm hoping you might be able to help me understand what happened. Clara's mouth went dry. What kind of trouble? A man named Frank Morrison was found shot dead behind your mother's house. The railroad company is claiming he was one of their surveyors, but I have my doubts about that. Sheriff Bradley settled into the chair Caleb offered him. I knew your mother, Mrs. Thorne. She was a good woman, and I know she was being pressured to sell her land. I don't remember much about the last few days, Clara said carefully. I had an accident. So, Mr. Thorne explained. The sheriff's eyes were sympathetic, but sharp. But sometimes memories come back in pieces. Even small details might help me understand what those men were really after. Clara looked at Caleb, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. How much should she tell? How much could she tell without remembering it herself? The land, she said finally. They wanted my mother's land. They said there might be minerals on it. More than just minerals. Sheriff Bradley said, I've seen the survey reports they filed with the territorial office. There's enough silver on that property to make a man rich for life, rich enough to kill for. You think Morrison was killed because of the silver? I think Morrison and his partners have been intimidating landowners all over this territory. using threats and violence to force sales at a fraction of what the land is really worth. Your mother wasn't the first to refuse their offers. Clara felt a chill run through her. 3 families in the past year, all with mineral-rich land, all pressured to sell. 2 of them gave in after accidents happened to their livestock or buildings. The 3rd family just disappeared one night. The Henderson family, Caleb said quietly. I remember hearing about that. Father, mother, and 2 young children. Just gone, like they'd never existed. Sheriff Bradley's expression was hard. But your mother was different, she fought back. Clara's heart began to race. What do you mean? I mean, someone put a bullet in Frank Morrison's heart from close range. Professional job, 1 shot, clean and quick. Either your mother was a better shot than anyone knew, or she had help. Clara forced herself to remain calm, even as memories tried to claw their way to the surface of her mind. Maybe it was someone passing through. A drifter who saw what was happening and intervened. Maybe. Sheriff Bradley studied her face carefully. But the thing is, Mrs. Thorne, Morrison wasn't killed during the attack on your mother. According to what I can piece together, your mother died first. Morrison was shot later, probably while he was searching the house. Searching for what? That's what I'm hoping you can tell me. What did your mother have that these men wanted so badly they'd kill for it? Clara glanced at the small key sitting on the dresser, wondering if it held the answer to that question. I honestly don't know, Sheriff. My mother lived simply. She didn't have much of value except the land. And yet someone shot Frank Morrison while he was tearing apart her house, looking for something small enough to hide, valuable enough to kill for. Before Clara could respond, there was a commotion outside, horses approaching at speed and men shouting. Caleb moved to the window, his hand instinctively going to his gun. Riders coming in fast, he reported. 3 of them. Sheriff Bradley was on his feet instantly. The same 3 that have been asking questions around town, probably. Clara felt fear and something else, anger, rise in her chest. These men had killed her mother, terrorized her family, and now they were threatening the only safety she'd found. Without conscious thought, she moved toward the rifle leaning against the wall. Clara, no, Caleb said sharply. You stay here with the sheriff. Like hell I will. The words came out with such vehemence that both men stared at her. Clara felt as surprised as they looked. Where had that steel in her voice come from? Mrs. Thorne, Sheriff Bradley said gently, your husband is right. This is no place for what? For the person they're really hunting? Clara grabbed the rifle and checked the action with movements that were becoming more familiar each time she handled the weapon. Sheriff, you want to know what they're looking for? They're looking for whoever shot Frank Morrison. And you're looking at her. The admission hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Sheriff Bradley's eyebrows rose, but he didn't look entirely surprised. You remember? No, Clara said, frustrated. But I know it was me. I can feel it, even if I can't remember it. And I'm tired of hiding from the consequences of defending my mother. Clara, Caleb said urgently, remembering won't bring her back. It'll only put you in more danger. I'm already in danger. We all are, as long as these men think they can terrorize people with impunity. From downstairs came the sound of splintering wood, the front door being kicked in. Sheriff Bradley drew his gun, his face grim. Well, he said, I guess we're about to find out just how much you remember about using that rifle. Clara felt something click into place in her mind, not memory exactly, but instinct. The weight of the Winchester in her hands felt right, felt like coming home. Her finger found the trigger guard with practiced ease. I may not remember killing Frank Morrison, she said quietly, but I remember why it needed to be done. And I remember that some men only understand one kind of justice. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house below, getting closer. Caleb positioned himself by the door, gun drawn. Sheriff Bradley moved to the other side of the room, creating crossfire angles. Mrs. Thorne, the sheriff said softly, if you're going to remember how to use that rifle, Now would be a good time. Clara leveled the Winchester at the door and felt something deep in her mind shift like a door opening onto a dark room. She didn't remember Frank Morrison's face or the sound her rifle had made when she killed him, but she remembered the choice. The choice to fight back instead of hiding. The choice to be a protector instead of a victim. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom door. A rough voice called out, "We know you're in there, Thorne. Send out the woman, and nobody else has to get hurt." Caleb looked at Clara, and she saw something like pride in his eyes. "Your choice," he said quietly. Clara smiled grimly. "Then we fight." The confrontation Clara had steeled herself for never came. Instead of kicking down the bedroom door, the footsteps retreated. Voices drifted up from below Caleb's deep baritone and another man's rough tones, but the words were too muffled to understand. "What are they doing?" Clara whispered, still gripping the rifle. Sheriff Bradley moved cautiously to the window that overlooked the front porch. "Talking. Just talking." He sounded as puzzled as Clara felt. After what felt like an eternity, the front door closed with a solid thunk, and the sound of horses retreating echoed through the rain. Clara didn't lower her rifle until Caleb's familiar footsteps climbed the stairs. "They're gone," he said as he entered the room, "but we need to talk, all of us." "What did they want?" Sheriff Bradley asked. "To make a deal." Caleb's expression was unreadable. "They're willing to forget about Frank Morrison's death if Clara signs over her mother's land to their railroad consortium." Clara felt her temper flare. "And you told them?" "I told them I'd discuss it with my wife." Caleb held up a hand before Clara could explode. "I didn't say we'd accept. I said we'd discuss it." "There's nothing to discuss," Clara snapped. "That land is all I have left of my family." "Clara," Sheriff Bradley said gently, "may I see that key you found?" Surprised by the change of subject, Clara retrieved the key from the dresser and handed it to him. The sheriff examined it carefully, then looked up with a strange expression. "I've seen one like this before. It's for a safe deposit box at the Territorial Bank in Cheyenne." "My mother had a safe deposit box?" "Apparently so. And if these men are willing to make a deal rather than simply take what they want by force, it suggests they need something more than just the land deed." Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" "What? I mean they need Clara alive and legally competent to sign papers. Dead women can't transfer property rights, especially when there might be competing claims or mineral rights involved." Clara sank into the chair by the window, her mind racing. "So, my marriage to Caleb complicates things for them legally," Sheriff Bradley finished. "As your husband, Caleb has certain rights to your property. They can't just eliminate you and forge documents anymore." "But if I'm legally dead—" "You're not legally dead," Caleb said quietly. "I lied about the grave, remember? There's no death certificate, no legal documentation. Clara Mae Whitfield is very much alive in the eyes of the law." Sheriff Bradley nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking, but it means they'll keep coming until they get what they want." "Unless we can prove what they've done," Clara said. "Sheriff, you said other families had been threatened. Is there enough evidence to arrest them?" "Not without witnesses willing to testify, and most of the people who could testify are either dead or too frightened to speak." Clara stood and began pacing the small room, her mind working furiously. "What if we could prove they murdered my mother? And my Aunt Sarah? Your Aunt Sarah?" Sheriff Bradley looked confused. Caleb explained about Sarah Whitfield Thorne, about her death 3 years earlier and its connection to the same land dispute. Sheriff Bradley listened with growing interest. "So this has been going on for years," he mused. "They've been systematically eliminating anyone with a claim to valuable land." "Which means there might be evidence," Clara said excitedly. "Papers, records, something that connects all the deaths and disappearances." "Where would such evidence be?" Caleb asked. Clara held up the key. "Maybe in whatever this opens." "It's worth investigating," Sheriff Bradley agreed. "But getting to Cheyenne safely might be a problem. These men will be watching the roads. Not all the roads, Caleb said slowly. There's an old mining trail through the mountains. It's rough going, but it would get us there without using the main routes. Clara looked between the two men. Us? You'd both come with me? You're not going anywhere alone, Caleb said firmly. Those men made it clear they won't give up easily. And I have a professional interest in seeing justice done, Sheriff Bradley added. Too many people have died already. They spent the next hour planning their trip to Cheyenne, but Clara found her attention wandering. Something was nagging at her, some detail that didn't quite fit. Finally, she excused herself and went to retrieve her journal from its hiding place. She read through the entries again, more carefully this time, looking for anything she might have missed. It was in the final entry, the one describing her agreement to marry Caleb, that she found it. The handwriting was hers, but it was different somehow, shakier in places, more careful in others, as if the person writing it had been trying very hard to control their hand. Clara compared it to the earlier entries and felt her blood turn cold. The differences were subtle but unmistakable. Someone had added to her journal after she'd written it. She grabbed the journal and hurried back to the bedroom, where Caleb and Sheriff Bradley were still discussing travel routes. "Caleb," she said, "who else has had access to my journal?" He looked up, surprised. "No one, as far as I know. Why?" Clara opened the journal to the final entry and pointed to a specific paragraph. "This handwriting, it's not quite right. Someone added to what I wrote." Sheriff Bradley examined the journal carefully. "You're right. Look here, this section about agreeing to marry Mr. Thorne. The ink is slightly different, and the pressure on the paper isn't consistent with the rest of the entry. Someone wanted it to appear that I'd agreed to the marriage willingly," Clara said, her voice tight with anger. "But I never wrote those words." Caleb's face had gone pale. "Clara, I swear to you, I know you didn't." Clara touched his hand gently. "The question is, who did, and what else have they manipulated?" Sheriff Bradley was studying the journal more closely. "Mrs. Thorne, do you remember actually writing any of these entries?" "No, but I assumed that was because of my head injury." "What if it's not? What if someone else wrote the entire journal?" The possibility hit Clara like a physical blow. "But it's my handwriting, is it? Or is it someone else's handwriting that looks like yours?" Clara stared at the journal, her mind reeling. If someone had forged the entire thing, it meant everything she thought she knew about the last few days was a lie. "Who would do such a thing?" she whispered. "Someone who needed you to believe a specific version of events," Caleb said grimly. "Someone who wanted you confused and dependent. But who else knows my handwriting well enough to—" Clara stopped mid-sentence, a horrible suspicion forming in her mind. "What is it?" Sheriff Bradley asked. "Ruth. Mrs. Henderson. She's been taking care of me, bringing me meals, asking questions about what I remember." Clara looked at Caleb with growing alarm. "How long has she worked for you?" 23 years, like she said. She's practically family." "Caleb, what if she's been reporting to them? What if she's the one who's been keeping them informed about my condition, my memory loss?" The three of them stared at each other as the implications sank in. If Ruth was working with the killers, then Clara had been under surveillance the entire time she'd been at the ranch. Every conversation, every recovered memory, every plan they'd made, all of it could have been compromised. "We need to leave," Caleb said urgently. "Now, before—" The sound of footsteps in the hallway cut him off. But these weren't Ruth's familiar, comfortable steps. These were the heavy boots of men who no longer cared about being quiet. "Too late," Sheriff Bradley said, drawing his gun. "They're already here." Clara grabbed her rifle and moved to the window. In the fading afternoon light, she could see more men than before, at least 6, positioned around the house like they were laying siege. "How did they get so close without the ranch hands seeing them?" she asked. Caleb's expression was grim as understanding dawned. "Because Ruth told them exactly where everyone would be positioned. She's been feeding them information all along." From somewhere below came Ruth's voice, raised in false distress. "Mr. Caleb, come quick, there's been an accident." "She's trying to separate us," Sheriff Bradley observed. "Get you away from Clara so they can take her without a fight." Clara felt something cold and hard settle in her chest, not fear but anger. Pure, clean anger at the betrayal, at the manipulation, at the way these people had twisted everything good and safe into a trap. "Then let's not give them what they expect," she said, checking her rifle one final time. "Let's give them what they deserve." This time, when the footsteps approached the door, Clara was ready. Not just with her rifle, but with the certain knowledge that she was fighting for more than her own life. She was fighting for the memory of her mother, for her murdered aunt, for all the families who had been terrorized by these men, and she was fighting for the right to choose her own future rather than have it decided by killers and liars. The first thing that returned to Clara's memory was the smell of her mother's kitchen on the morning she died, coffee and bacon grease, mixed with the scent of fear sweat and something metallic that she now knew was blood. The memory hit her like a physical blow, so vivid and complete that she staggered against the window frame. "Clara!" Caleb moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I'm remembering," she whispered. "Not everything, but pieces." She closed her eyes and let the memories flow back, no longer fighting them. Her mother's terrified face as the men broke down the door, the sound of furniture being overturned as they searched the house, her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she crouched in the root cellar, clutching her rifle and trying to decide between hiding and fighting. "There were 4 of them," Clara said, her voice growing stronger. 4 men, not 3. Frank Morrison was their leader, but there was another one older, better dressed. He stayed outside while the others went in. Sheriff Bradley leaned forward intently. "Can you describe him?" Expensive clothes, silver hair, carried himself like a man used to giving orders. He had a scar along his jaw, like someone had tried to cut his throat and missed. "Jacob Hartwell," the sheriff said grimly. "I should have known. He owns the railroad consortium that's been buying up mineral rights. If he's involved personally, this is bigger than just your mother's land." Clara nodded, more memories flooding back. "He wanted something specific. Not just the land deed. He kept asking my mother about papers her father had left her. Legal documents proving mineral rights that went back to the original land grant. Those papers would be worth a fortune," Caleb said. "With the original grant documents, Hartwell could claim mineral rights to half the territory. And my grandfather kept copies," Clara continued, remembering now, "hidden where he thought they'd be safe. My mother knew where they were, but she wouldn't tell them." Ruth's voice drifted up from downstairs again, more urgent this time. "Mr. Caleb, please, I think Miguel's been hurt." "She's getting desperate," Sheriff Bradley observed. "Which means they are too." Clara moved away from the window and began examining the room with new eyes. If she was remembering correctly, if the journal had been forged and her understanding of events manipulated, then everything she thought she knew about this house might be wrong too. "Caleb," she said slowly, "how long have you actually known I was here?" His expression became wary. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I didn't come here asking for help? What if I was brought here unconscious, after my head injury, and you've been as much a prisoner as I have?" The possibility hung in the air between them like smoke. Clara could see Caleb working through the implications, his face growing pale. "The marriage certificate," he said suddenly. "I never actually saw us sign it. Ruth brought it to me afterward, said you'd been too distraught to remember the ceremony clearly. And you believed her because you're a good man who wanted to protect me," Clara said, pieces falling into place. "But what if there never was a ceremony? What if the whole thing was staged to make me believe I was safe here while they figured out how to get what they wanted?" Sheriff Bradley was studying them both with a calculating expression. "That would mean this has been an elaborate trap from the beginning. But why go to such lengths? Clara felt the last pieces of memory clicking into place, and with them came a cold, clear understanding of just how much danger they were all in. "Because I know where my grandfather's papers are hidden," she said quietly, "and Hartwell needs me alive and cooperative to get them. The marriage certificate, the forged journal, even my lost memory, it was all designed to make me grateful and trusting, so I'd lead them to the documents willingly." "Where are they?" Caleb asked. Clara pulled the small key from her pocket and held it up. "Not in a safe deposit box in Cheyenne. That was misdirection in case someone found the key. They're hidden right here, in this house." "Here?" Sheriff Bradley looked skeptical. "How is that possible?" "Because this house originally belonged to my grandfather. He sold it to Caleb's family 20 years ago, but not before hiding the most important documents somewhere he thought they'd never be found." Clara moved to the large wardrobe and began examining its construction more carefully. Her grandfather had been a carpenter before becoming a rancher, and he'd always believed in building things with hidden compartments and secret spaces. "Clara," Caleb said urgently, "we don't have time for this. Those men are going to lose patience soon. Then we'd better hurry." Clara ran her fingers along the inside of the wardrobe, searching for the telltale sign of a hidden mechanism. "Because the only way we're getting out of this alive is if we have something they want more than our deaths." Her fingers found it a small depression in the wood that felt different from the surrounding surface. She pressed it, and with a soft click, a panel slid aside to reveal a narrow compartment containing a leather portfolio tied with string. "Found them." Clara pulled out the portfolio and untied the string with shaking fingers. Inside were dozens of documents, land grants, mineral rights certificates, survey maps, and correspondence between her grandfather and territorial officials. Even at a glance, she could see that these papers established claims to mineral rights across a vast area of Wyoming territory. "Good God," Sheriff Bradley breathed. "These documents, they're worth more than money. They're worth power over the entire territorial development." "Which is why Hartwell was willing to kill for them," Clara said, "and why he went to such elaborate lengths to get me to find them willingly." "But you didn't," Caleb pointed out. "You resisted." "I resisted because some part of me remembered who I really was, even when I couldn't remember the details." Clara looked at the two men who had risked their lives to protect her. "The question now is what we do with this knowledge." From outside came the sound of more horses arriving. Clara moved to the window and felt her blood chill. At least a dozen riders now surrounded the house, and she could see the gleam of rifle barrels in the fading daylight. "They're not taking any more chances," she observed. "Neither should we." Caleb moved to a different window and cursed under his breath. "They've got Miguel and the other ranch hands tied up near the barn. If we try to fight our way out, innocent people will die." Clara studied the scene below, her mind racing. The men had positioned themselves well, covering all the obvious escape routes, but this had been her grandfather's house, and he'd been a man who believed in always having a way out. "There's a passage," she said suddenly, "from the cellar to the old mine shaft, about half a mile from here. Grandfather built it during the Indian troubles, in case the family needed to evacuate quickly." "Are you sure it's still passable?" Sheriff Bradley asked. "Only one way to find out." Clara began gathering the documents. "But first, we need to make sure these papers don't fall into Hartwell's hands, no matter what happens to us." She moved to the small fireplace in the corner of the room and began building a fire with kindling from the basket beside it. "Clara, what are you doing?" Caleb asked. "Creating insurance. I'm going to copy the most important information onto paper we can hide, then burn the originals if necessary. Hartwell gets nothing." She worked quickly, copying key passages and drawing rough maps while the fire built to a steady flame. The sound of men moving through the house below grew closer, and she could hear Ruth's voice directing them to the upstairs rooms. "Almost finished," Clara muttered, her pen flying across the paper. "Clara," Sheriff Bradley said urgently, "they're coming up the stairs." She folded the copies and handed them to Caleb, then held the originals over the fire. If they want these documents, they can try to read the ashes. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A rough voice called out, "Mrs. Thorne, my name is Jacob Hartwell. I believe we have some business to discuss." Clara exchanged glances with Caleb and Sheriff Bradley. The moment of truth had arrived. "Mr. Hartwell," she called back, "I believe you're right. But if you want to discuss anything, you'll do it with all of us present and all weapons holstered. I'm afraid I'm not in a position to negotiate, Mrs. Thorne. You have something that belongs to me. I have something that belonged to my grandfather, which he legally left to my family. What you have is a long history of theft and murder." There was a pause, then the sound of quiet conversation in the hallway. Clara used the time to slip the copies of the documents into her corset, hoping they'd escape notice if she was searched. "Very well," Hartwell said finally. "I'm coming in alone, and my men will keep their weapons lowered. But Mrs. Thorne, if you've damaged those documents in any way, there will be consequences for everyone in this house." Clara looked at the portfolio in her hands and at the fire crackling invitingly in the fireplace. She had the power to destroy everything Hartwell had killed for, but doing so might also destroy any chance of proving his crimes. It was time to make the most important choice of her life. The door opened slowly, and Jacob Hartwell stepped into the room with the confident stride of a man accustomed to getting his way. He was exactly as Clara remembered, silver-haired, expensively dressed, with cold eyes and the scar along his jaw that spoke of past violence. He kept his hands visible and away from his weapons, but Clara could see the barely restrained menace in his posture. "Mrs. Thorne," he said with mock courtesy, "you look much better than when we last met." "I don't remember our last meeting," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady, "though I suspect that was by design." Hartwell's smile was thin and predatory. "Memory is such a fragile thing, isn't it? Particularly when the mind experiences trauma. But I'm hoping we can clear up any confusion today." Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his badge catching the light. "Jacob Hartwell, you're under arrest for the murders of Clara Mae Whitfield and Sarah Whitfield Thorne, along with conspiracy to commit fraud and—" "Sheriff Bradley," Hartwell interrupted smoothly, "I'm disappointed but not surprised to find you here. Unfortunately, you're operating outside your jurisdiction and lack any evidence to support such serious accusations." "I have evidence," Clara said, holding up the leather portfolio. "Everything my grandfather documented about your illegal activities. Every forged deed, every fraudulent mineral claim, every family you've terrorized." Hartwell's eyes fixed on the portfolio with hungry intensity. "Those documents belong to my consortium, Mrs. Thorne. Your grandfather sold all rights to his discoveries when he sold this property. He sold the house and the grazing land. He never sold the mineral rights, and these papers prove it. Papers can be forged, memories can be unreliable, but possession is what matters in the end." Hartwell gestured slightly, and Clara heard movement in the hallway behind him. "And currently, I possess this house and everyone in it." Clara moved closer to the fireplace, holding the portfolio over the flames. "Then you possess nothing, because if you take one step closer, these documents become ash." "You wouldn't dare," but uncertainty flickered in Hartwell's eyes. "You'd be destroying your family's legacy." "My family's legacy is justice, not greed, and I'd rather see these papers burn than let you profit from my mother's murder." The standoff stretched between them, tension thick as smoke. Clara could hear men positioning themselves in the hallway, could see Caleb and Sheriff Bradley calculating angles and distances. One wrong move and blood would paint the walls. It was then that Clara noticed something odd. Through the window, she could see Ruth Henderson walking calmly toward the barn where the ranch hands were tied up. But instead of the distressed, frightened woman she'd been pretending to be, Ruth moved with purpose and carried what looked like a rifle. "Caleb," Clara said quietly, not taking her eyes off Hartwell, Look toward the barn. Caleb glanced out the window and his expression hardened. Ruth's cutting the men loose. What? Hartwell spun toward the window, his composure cracking for the first time. That's not part of the plan. What plan would that be? Sheriff Bradley asked with interest. But Clara was already putting the pieces together. Ruth isn't working for you, is she? She's been playing her own game. Ruth Henderson appeared in the doorway behind Hartwell, her matronly appearance transformed by the Winchester rifle in her hands and the cold determination in her eyes. The men in the hallway had vanished. Clara could hear shouting and gunfire from outside as Caleb's ranch hands, now freed, engaged Hartwell's remaining forces. "Hello, Jacob," Ruth said conversationally. "Surprised to see me?" "Ruth, what the hell are you doing?" "We had an agreement. We had an agreement 20 years ago, too. Right before you had my husband killed." Ruth's voice was steady, but Clara could see the years of pain and rage burning behind her eyes. "Did you really think I'd forgotten? Did you think I'd forgiven?" Clara stared at the woman who had been caring for her, understanding flooding through her. "Your husband, he was working with my grandfather, wasn't he? Trying to expose Hartwell's operation. My Thomas was an honest man who believed in justice. When he discovered what Jacob was doing, the forged claims, the intimidation, the murders, he tried to stop it. Ruth's grip on the rifle never wavered. Jacob had him shot in the back and made it look like a hunting accident. "Ruth," Hartwell said carefully, "that was business, nothing personal. And you've done well for yourself working for me all these years." "Working for you?" Ruth laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've been working against you. Every family you tried to intimidate, I warned. Every document you thought was secure, I copied. Every plan you made, I found a way to sabotage." The revelation hit Clara like cold water. "You've been protecting people. That's why the Henderson family disappeared. You helped them escape, among others. I couldn't save everyone, but I saved who I could." Ruth's attention returned to Hartwell, including Clara's Aunt Sarah. "She didn't die in a riding accident, Jacob. She's alive and well in California with a new name and a new life." Hartwell's face went white. "That's impossible. I saw the body. You saw what I wanted you to see. Sarah was too smart to trust you completely, even when she was pretending to cooperate. When she realized you meant to kill her, she came to me for help." Clara felt hope bloom in her chest. Her aunt was alive, her mother's sister had survived Hartwell's violence and was safe, but Hartwell was recovering from his shock, his hand moving slowly toward his gun. "It doesn't matter. Sarah's testimony from California won't help anyone here today." "You're right," Ruth agreed, "but this will." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small leather book, identical to the journal Clara had found, but clearly older. "Thomas kept records," Ruth said. "Every crime, every victim, every piece of evidence. I've been adding to it for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to use it." Clara understood now why Ruth had been so interested in her memory, why she'd been so careful to keep her confused and dependent. She'd been protecting Clara while gathering the final pieces of evidence needed to destroy Hartwell once and for all. "You could have told me," Clara said. "I couldn't risk it. You needed to remember on your own, to be a credible witness, and I needed Hartwell to come here personally, to give me the chance I've been waiting for." The sound of gunfire from outside was diminishing now, and Clara could hear Caleb's men calling to each other as they secured the area. But in this room, the most dangerous confrontation was just beginning. Hartwell's hand froze halfway to his gun as the implications of Ruth's words sank in. 20 years of evidence, 20 years of documented crimes, it would be enough to hang him twice over. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Ruth opened the journal and began reading in a clear, steady voice. "October 15th, 1868. Jacob Hartwell ordered the murder of prospector William Chen after Chen refused to sell his claim. Chen's body was found 3 days later with a bullet in his back. Witnesses: Thomas Henderson and Miguel Santos. Miguel, Caleb's foreman. Clara felt the pieces clicking together as she realized the network of resistance Ruth had been building all these years. November 3rd, 1869, Ruth continued. Hartwell's men burned out the Morrison family after they refused to sign over their mineral rights. 2 children died in the fire. Evidence: burnt deed found in Hartwell's possession, witnessed by Thomas Henderson. "Stop," Hartwell said, his composure finally cracking. "Those are lies, fabrications." December 1st, 1870. Hartwell murdered my husband Thomas Henderson when Thomas threatened to expose his operation to territorial authorities. I watched from the ridge as Hartwell shot him in the back. Clara saw it now, the pain Ruth had carried all these years, the careful planning, the patience it must have taken to maintain her cover while gathering evidence. This woman had sacrificed everything for justice. "Ruth," Caleb said quietly, "why didn't you come forward sooner? Who would have believed a widow with no education against the richest man in the territory? I needed proof, not just testimony, and I needed the right moment when he couldn't buy his way out or eliminate the witnesses." Hartwell's mask had slipped completely now, revealing the cold killer beneath the gentleman's facade. "It doesn't matter what's in that book, old woman. Dead witnesses tell no tales." His hand moved for his gun, but Clara was faster. The Winchester in her hand spoke with thunder, the bullet taking Hartwell high in the shoulder and spinning him around. The gun flew from his nerveless fingers, clattering across the hardwood floor. "That's for my mother," Clara said, working the lever to chamber another round. "And this—" "Clara, no." Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his own gun drawn but pointed at the floor. "He's down. It's over." Clara kept the rifle trained on Hartwell as he clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face twisted with pain and fury. Is it really over? How many other families has he destroyed? How many other people has he murdered?" "Enough that he'll hang for it," Ruth said firmly. "But through the law, not through revenge. That's what separates us from him." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy, one more shot and Jacob Hartwell would never threaten another innocent family. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw not a monster, but a broken, pathetic man whose greed had cost him everything. "You're right," she said finally, lowering the rifle. "He's not worth becoming a killer for." Sheriff Bradley moved forward and knelt beside Hartwell, checking his wound and then pulling out handcuffs. "Jacob Hartwell, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, fraud, and more crimes than I can count right now." "You can't prove anything," Hartwell gasped, but his protest sounded hollow even to himself. "Actually, we can." Ruth held up the journal. 20 years of documentation, corroborated by witnesses who are still alive, plus Clara's testimony about your confession regarding her mother's murder. "I never confessed to anything." "You confessed when you threatened me," Clara said, "when you talked about what your men had done." Sheriff Bradley heard every word. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his clothes torn and a cut on his cheek, but very much alive. "The rest of his men are either captured or fled," he reported. "Miguel and the others are securing the area." Clara felt something inside her chest unclench for the first time in days. It was truly over. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we take Mr. Hartwell to jail, where he'll await trial," Sheriff Bradley said. "And then we start the long process of returning stolen land to its rightful owners." "And the mineral rights?" Clara asked, thinking of the documents hidden in her corset. "Will be honored according to the original grants, as they should have been all along." Ruth moved to the window and looked out at the ranch, her shoulders finally relaxing after years of carrying an impossible burden. "Your grandfather would be proud, Clara. He always said the truth has a way of coming to light, given enough time." Clara touched the copies of the documents hidden beneath her dress, her grandfather's legacy, her family's future, and the foundation for justice that had been 20 years in the making. But more than that, She thought of the badge that Caleb's father had worn, the one that represented protection of the innocent and the pursuit of justice. "Ruth," she said quietly, "thank you for everything, for keeping my aunt safe, for protecting other families, for waiting so long to see justice done." "It was worth the wait," Ruth replied, her voice soft with satisfaction. "Some things are worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes." Clara nodded, understanding now that her story was part of something much larger, a fight between justice and greed, between protection and exploitation, that had been going on long before she was born and would continue long after she was gone. But today, at least, justice had won. 1 year later, Clara stood in the same bedroom where she had first awakened as a confused and frightened young woman. But today, everything was different. Sunlight streamed through windows that no longer held secrets, and the house itself felt lighter somehow, as if the shadows of the past had finally been cleared away. She touched her hand to the gentle curve of her belly where their child grew, a smile playing at her lips as she remembered Caleb's face when she told him the news just 3 weeks ago. His joy had been so complete, so unguarded, that it had erased any lingering doubts she might have harbored about the authenticity of their feelings for each other. "Almost ready?" Caleb's voice came from the doorway, and Clara turned to see him dressed in his finest suit, his hair neatly combed, but his eyes holding that warm light that had become so familiar to her. "Almost," she replied, moving to the dresser where 2 simple gold bands lay waiting. They had chosen them together, these new rings that would replace the heavy band she'd awakened with that first morning. These rings represented their choice, their future, their genuine commitment to each other. Today they would marry again, not out of necessity or protection, but out of love. The first ceremony they had learned had been as false as everything else about those dark days. Ruth had forged the certificate, using her skills as Jacob Hartwell's unwilling accomplice, creating a legal fiction that had ultimately saved Clara's life. But this marriage would be real in every way that mattered. "The guests are starting to arrive," Caleb said, reaching for her hand. "Your Aunt Sarah rode in from California this morning. She's eager to see you." Clara's heart lifted at the thought of meeting her mother's sister, the woman whose survival had been Ruth's greatest secret. They had corresponded regularly over the past year, slowly building the family connection that should have existed all along. Sarah had written about their mother as a young woman, sharing stories and memories that helped fill the void left by her death. And Ruth? Downstairs in the kitchen, naturally. She's been cooking for 3 days straight, convinced that feeding the entire territory is the only appropriate way to celebrate. Clara laughed, thinking of the woman who had become like a mother to her over the past year. After Hartwell's trial and conviction, he had indeed hanged for his crimes. Ruth had stayed on at the ranch, no longer as Caleb's employee, but as Clara's chosen family. The deception she had maintained for so long had been replaced by fierce protectiveness and genuine love. And Miguel? Standing at the altar, looking more nervous than I am, which is saying something. I think he's more worried about whether the flowers are arranged properly than I am about getting married. Clara moved to the window and looked out at the scene below. The ranch yard had been transformed with white ribbons and wildflowers, and guests were gathering under the cottonwood trees where the ceremony would take place. She could see familiar faces, Sheriff Bradley, who had become a close friend over the months of legal proceedings, the ranch hands who had fought to protect them, townspeople who had suffered under Hartwell's reign and now felt safe enough to celebrate openly. But there were new faces too, families who had returned to reclaim land that Hartwell had stolen, prospectors and homesteaders who no longer lived in fear of intimidation and violence. The territory was healing, slowly but surely, and Clara took pride in knowing she had played a part in that healing. "Clara," Caleb said softly, "are you having second thoughts?" She turned to face him. This man who had risked everything to protect her when she was a stranger, who had stood by her through the return of terrible memories, who had chosen love over safety and truth over comfort. "About marrying you? Never." She moved to him and straightened his tie, her hands steady and sure. But I am thinking about how different everything is from that first morning when I woke up here. Different how? I was so lost then. I didn't know who I was or where I belonged. I was afraid of everything, my memories, my feelings, even my own strength. And now, Clara picked up the simple gold ring that would soon rest on her finger beside the wedding band she had chosen for herself. Now, I know exactly who I am. I'm Clara Mae Whitfield Thorne, daughter of Sarah Mae Whitfield, niece of Sarah Whitfield, wife of Caleb Thorne. She paused, her hand moving to her belly again. And soon to be mother of the next generation of this family, and you're not afraid anymore? Oh, I'm still afraid sometimes. But now I'm afraid of real things, whether I'll be a good mother, whether we'll have enough rain for the crops, whether that new bull Miguel wants to buy is worth the price. She smiled up at him. Not afraid of shadows and lies and things that were never real to begin with. Caleb cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle as always. You'll be an excellent mother, and everything else, we'll face it together. Together, Clara agreed, liking the sound of that word. It had taken her time to understand that strength didn't always mean standing alone, that sometimes the greatest courage lay in trusting someone else to stand with you. A knock on the door interrupted them. "Clara, dear," Ruth's voice called through the wood, "your aunt is here, and the preacher is ready whenever you are." "We're coming," Clara called back, then turned to Caleb one last time. "Ready, husband?" "Ready, wife." They walked down the stairs together, past the photographs of Caleb's family that no longer seemed like stern judges, but like ancestors offering their blessing. In the parlor, Clara embraced her Aunt Sarah, a woman whose face was indeed remarkably similar to her own, but whose eyes held the wisdom of someone who had survived great trials and found peace on the other side. As they moved toward the door that would take them to their wedding ceremony, Clara caught sight of herself in the hall mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the confused, the frightened girl who had awakened in this house 13 months ago. This woman stood straight and tall, her eyes clear and determined, her hand resting confidently on her husband's arm. This was who she had chosen to become. This was the life she had chosen to build. And as they stepped out into the sunlight to begin their new life together, Clara Mae Whitfield Thorne had never been more certain of anything in her life.